And I think the biggest discouragement for me was the fact that some of these other runners, it was their first marathon as well. And if I was really honest, I felt extremely pathetic. Well, we're finally here. I recently just came back from running the New York Marathon, and it was an incredible experience. I'm actually looking forward to telling you the story. But to start, we actually have to take it to the very beginning. In the middle of 2021, I had this random thought coming out of nowhere. I should run a marathon. As a matter of fact, I think I should run the New York Marathon. That thought, I paid no further attention and left it at that. It wasn't until August of 2021 when a nonprofit that I love and support called Charity Water reached out to me, asking me, hey, if I would be willing to run the upcoming New York Marathon that year, which was 3 months away. Now, I'm self-aware enough to know that in 3 months of training, I don't think I would have been able to pull it off. So I asked them, hey, would you be able to sign me up for next year's marathon? And they said that they would get back to me. Later on in the year, I had a small virtual gathering with Charity Water and a few friends of mine. In that gathering, I let them know that my plan was to run the New York Marathon of 2022. And at that point, things got pretty official for me. In mid-October of 21, I began my training. It started with 1 mile and went on from there. There were lessons that I learned during training and even the race itself that I want to share with you because I truly believe that these are the lessons that help us run with endurance for the long term. That in whatever vision that you have when it comes to creating a change in your life and the lives of others, that is going to require running for the long term. In other words, running your race. The first lesson that I learned is to run in your own lane. In the beginning of training, I was looking for inspiration from other runners, and I quickly fell into the comparison game where I would compare myself as far as my pace, the distance that I was performing with versus those who were either doing it for a very long time or just starting out. As a matter of fact, Eric, who is a close family friend of mine, was actually the second interview that I had for this podcast. He trained for and ran a marathon within 8 weeks, and he absolutely killed it. Well, at that time, my pace was very much slower than his, definitely nowhere near the same distance, and I just felt pretty incompetent, if I were to be honest. However, I needed to change the frames through which I was looking through, as my friend Tommy Colonin has said. And those people that I was comparing myself to, they shouldn't be points of discouragement. Instead, I could recognize that I could learn from them, that they could serve as markers. Ever since then, my frame was completely shifted. I just focused on improving myself. How can I get better 1% at a time and learn from others? Now, this served me extremely well up until 3 days before the race. See, I was running with a team of other runners, and 3 days before the race, I received an email of the start times of the other runners. Now, I'll let you know, I was the last one starting and the last one finishing, which very much means that everyone else was running at a faster pace, very likely finishing at a shorter time. And I think the biggest discouragement for me was the fact that some of these other runners, it was their first marathon as well. And if I was really honest, I felt extremely pathetic. It was a whole year of training. And yet the most I was able to realistically accomplish for was approximately about 5 hours of finishing the race. And it was nowhere near what these other runners were performing at. A few days prior to that, Dupree, who was one of the guests for this podcast, encouraged me to make sure that I enjoy the experience, that I would enjoy the process. And even after I got that email notifying me of the start times, there were several other people who did not know each other and were telling me the same exact thing. Hey, make sure you enjoy the whole experience. I think for me, I recognized in that moment how my mind was so fixed on the end goal of getting to the race itself, and even at the race of trying to get through the finish line, that I completely missed the enjoying portion of training and the journey. Now, don't get me wrong, training in of itself was absolutely enjoyable. And there are key moments that I love and appreciate. I think after that moment when I was reminded to enjoy the process, that's when things really began to shift in my perspective. In other words, I recognized there is power in presence. I began to see the whole experience in a new light, even when I was at New York, and really began to slow down and experience all that was happening. It was incredible. There were so many great things that were happening in that moment. Like, for example, in that weekend, we hit our fundraising goal, and now 151 people will gain access to clean water. And I just think about the generations afterwards who would never have to experience what it's like not having access to clean water. I think about simply slowing down to be present with the friends and the family that were surrounding me, supporting me and cheering me on. And this countless of people who were supporting me throughout this whole process, and especially the weekend of. I had to recognize that in the end of the day, I just have to run in my own pace. It's going to be different than others, but this is in my own lane. We see in track how for runners, if you step outside of your own lane, you could get disqualified. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that when it comes to the race of life. We can't be worrying of trying to step into somebody else's lane. We have our own lane to run, our own story to write, and our own impact to create. In the journey, and especially during training, the second thing that I learned is that sometimes you got to slow down in order to speed up. There were different points during training when I was going at a certain fast pace, and I recognized, oh man, I feel something cramping inside of me. And that was just my body's way of letting me know, hey, you got to slow it down a bit. I did have to slow down, and I had to recover. And once I was able to push through that, I was able to return back to a greater pace, to a greater tempo, and more sustainable tempo. I think it brings me back to that same thing that my friends were reminding me in the very beginning, to enjoy the process. When I think about just in my own life, there are different moments when I'm going way too fast, where I'm too ambitious. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with pursuing these different goals and trying to make a certain change. However, I've had to recognize for myself in those moments, those were often times when I neglected things that matter the most to me. When I was so focused on work and achieving that, I neglected my family and key relationships in my life. It's so noticeable for me. I've come to a point where I could literally feel the difference, a lack of rest, high amount of anxiousness, feeling depleted. And I think those are signals for all of us that we might need to just slow down a bit, that it's okay. It's okay to take time to rest. And every single time I do, I always come back stronger, better, and in a more sustainable pace when I put things in their proper place. And so I would just ask you, in your pursuit of creating a change, whether in this world or in your own life, what are the things that you've been neglecting? Have you noticed that you're operating in a pace that's just going to lead you to burnout? I would encourage you to be proactive instead of reactive. Don't wait for things to burn out and fall under in order for you to take a step in making a change right now. Again, the goal is not to run a sprint. I think the race of life is very much like a marathon. I would say a combination of a relay race and a marathon, that we are called to run with endurance for the long term. And the third lesson that I learned throughout this whole journey and process, it's the power of people. During training in and of itself, I had several people surrounding me, constantly encouraging me. Hey, you got this. Keep going. It's inspiring what you're doing. There's a huge difference when training by yourself versus running with others. When you're training by yourself, you make it personal. But when you're running with others, it becomes powerful. There's a different amount of adrenaline come race day when you're running with several others who are alongside you. On race day in of itself, there were several people who were texting me and messaging me throughout the whole race, just letting me know, hey, you got this, keep going, don't stop. And it was fuel. And if I were really honest, there were moments when I was getting texts and I just did not have the energy within me to keep running. And so I had to take moments to walk. Specifically in mile 15, we were in Queens and I was just walking it out, did not have the energy to try to running, just needed a moment to recover. And then there was a pacing group that actually caught to me and run just right past me. And fortunately, this is the same pace that I was hoping to accomplish finishing the marathon at a certain time. The moment they passed right past me, it was a second win kind of moment. I just ran right with them. It was like running with a pack. And I've seen it time and time again in my own life when I was pursuing different goals and different ambitions and so forth. The difference it made when I'm running with others, to be present enough to encourage me when I'm down and to call me up to a higher vision when I'm pursuing a goal. I think it's worth asking yourself, who are the people in your life who are encouraging you, challenging you, calling you up, in other words, running with you? Are there people who are perhaps steps ahead of you that you can run with and learn from? There was a key moment for me during that marathon. At mile 15, that's when the tiredness started to kick in. Mile 18, my legs gave out and I had to walk/run for 2 miles in order to recover. At mile 23, that's when the doubts started to kick in. Don't get me wrong, I already predetermined that I was going to finish this marathon, even if I needed to walk those last few miles. However, that's when my brain started to play tricks on me and just tell me, you could take it easy. As a matter of fact, you could probably quit if you really wanted to. And so at mile 24, I was already walking at that point. Everything within me wanted me to quit. And good friends of mine, I'll give them a shout out, Mario and Alicia, Tristan, Gavin, and their parents surprised me at mile 24. Tristan in particular, he walked right behind me and he was just encouraging me, hey, you got this, one step at a time. Now, if I were super honest, my emotions came out. I had to let out a tear or two, but just having that encouragement at such a critical moment meant the world, meant the difference. And it was a second win kind of moment, the one that just reminded me, you got this. I could do this. I could see this through, finishing well, finishing strong. That is the power of people in your life. If we're going to run this journey, if we're going to try to make a change in our own lives and the lives of others, we need people. We don't have to do this alone. Yes, there might be moments of loneliness, feeling like I'm the only one who has this vision. However, there are people available and willing to support you. As a matter of fact, consider this podcast community as people for you who are willing to cheer you on and encourage you. And finally, I would say this, that consistent steps are way better than large, infrequent steps. What do I mean by that? I began training in mid-October of 2021. I didn't jump right out the gate ready to run a marathon. It began with 1 mile, then 2, then 3, and so forth. At times that I felt like, I could just take it easy and not go for a run, I pushed myself to go for a run. I had the end goal in mind. If I were to be super honest, yes, I really was training to finish the marathon, but I was just more afraid of failing at the marathon than failing at training. And so it was motivation for me to say, hey, you know what? I'd rather pay the price now in this small doable step than to fail dramatically at the marathon. But it served me. And I had the intention and the ambition to keep showing up. I remember I ran a half marathon distance for the first time in end of July of this year. And at the time, it was the most challenging thing I've ever done. Well, a few weeks prior to the marathon itself, the most I ever ran during my training was 21 miles. And that became the most difficult thing ever. A couple weeks afterwards, I ran a half marathon distance again. By the time I ran the half marathon distance, it was a piece of cake. I looked at it like, this is nothing. This is nothing in comparison to 21 miles. And so I just want to say this to encourage you. You might find yourself in different obstacles in your journey. I do believe there is purpose in the pain, that it's an opportunity to grow your endurance. All of it, all the obstacles and the trials that we face in our journey, that it makes us stronger, that it causes us to grow in such a way where when we face something similar, we have the confidence that I survived the last time, I can get through it this time. And that our lives can be inspiration and encouragement for others who are going through something similar. The marathon itself, it didn't seem so intimidating because I've already taken steps beforehand to train, to grow, and get as close as possible to the number of miles. So wherever you may find yourself, I want to encourage you in this. You're not alone. You are capable and you are able to do this. You got this. And that vision that you have to make a change is doable. It is doable. Start with where you're at. And I believe that these lessons can serve you in running your race for the long term. If no one's told you this week, I love you. I'm cheering you on. I'm supporting you. I'm excited to see the impact we are going to make together in our lifetimes. Thank you for listening to the One Step Podcast. If you actually wanted to see the marathon itself that I ran, you can go ahead and check out this video right over here. Feel free to follow us on social media at the handle One Step Podcast so you don't miss out on practical steps to take one step in creating change. Remember, change begins and continues with one step.